Vach Shvatov. We are learning Nishmas Mindel, Mariam Bas Kalman Ruven. We are on Nun Amud Beis by the words Amar Rav Yehuda. Amar Rav Yehuda, a couple of lines down. Okay, says the Gemara. Rav Yehuda. Afar levinsa shri. A person is allowed to wash on Shabbos, wash their hands or wash their face using powdered brick. So this is a continuation of the discussion we had yesterday, and that was about substances which, due to the intensity of the substance, it's possible that it's going to rip out some hair. And so we have machlokas, which has been recurring machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Shimon about davar she'eino miskavein. Rabbi Yehuda holds that if I do something, even if it's not my intent, and something is going to happen which is a malacha, I'm going to be chayiv. So the classic example of this is if a person has a large bench, and they want to bring it from one side of the yard to the other, and they drag the bench across the yard. Their intention is to just move the item from point A to point B, but in the process, it's very possible that they're going to go ahead and dig up some of the soil, causing some form of plowing, and so it's not their intention, but nonetheless, Rabbi Yehuda holds you are chayiv. Reb Shimon holds davar she'eino miskavein pater, you are exempt in such a case, and therefore over here you're allowed to use powder brick to wash your face, even though it's going to pull out some of your hair, some of your facial hair. It's still fine because it's not your intention. Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says kuspa de yasmin shri, sesame pulp is permitted. Same idea. It's a certain substance which, again, it's not your intention, but it's possible. And the reason I say possible is because if it's inevitable, even though it's not your intent, it's going to be asr. It's something called psik resha, and that when you do something, even though it's not your intention, but it's inevitable that a malacha is going to happen, there even Rav Shimon would agree. But in a scenario where it's possible, but not inevitable, there Rav Shimon says it's allowed. So here we have a couple of examples, since we paskin like Rav Shimon, davar she'eino miskavein is mutter, we have a couple of examples where different substances can be used to wash your face, even though it might pull out hair. Nonetheless, it's permitted because it's a davar she'eino miskavein. Rava says, after pilplei shari, crushed pepper is permitted to use that to wash your face. Amrav sheshes, barda shri, barda is allowed. My barda, what in the world is barda? Amrav Yosef, tilsa ahala, v'tilsa asa, v'tilsa sigale. It's 1/3 aloe, 1/3 myrtle, and 1/3 violet. Amrav Nechemeh bar Yosef, or Nechemeh Yosef says, kol hecha deleka ruba ahala shaper dami. He says it doesn't have to be 1/3 of aloe. The aloe is a substance which pulls out hair. Even if it's up to a half of aloe, it is mutter. Okay, so that's machlokas. Does it need to be 1/3 of aloe, or it could be up to half? One way or another, it's going to be permitted. If it's more than that, it seems like it's inevitable that it's going to pull out hair, and that would be problematic. But Rav Sheshes, they asked the following question from Rav Sheshes, Malutzo Zaysim Shabbos. Okay, there's a number of ways to understand this question. I'm going to go with one of the Rishonim, not Rashi. But the question that's asked is, are you allowed to smash olives on Shabbos in order to use the olive oil to wash your face? It seems like olive oil also, there's a concern it's going to pull out hair. Amar Lahu v'chi b'chol mitiru. Rav Sheshes says, why are you asking about Shabbos? Are you even allowed to do this during the week? So the Gemara explains, what's his retort? Kesavar mishum hefsed ochalan. Rav Sheshes holds that since you're ruining the olives are food, and you're ruining it, you're wasting it because you're using it for soap, he holds you can't even do it during the week. Lema pligi de Shmuel. Maybe he argues on Shmuel. Maybe Rav Sheshes, who says you can't use olive oil for soap, which ruins the olives, maybe he argues on Shmuel. Which statement of Shmuel? Shmuel said, Osa Adam called tzark, but fast person's allowed to use bread for any purposes. So it sounds like he's arguing with Rav Sheshes. Shmuel says you can use bread for anything. Rav Sheshes says you can't use olives for their olive oil for soap. The Gemara says no, there's no machlokas between them. Amri pasla me'isa. When we're talking about using bread, we're talking about using bread in a way that does not make it disgusting. So for example, I have my phone over here recording me, and I'm using my laptop to hold it up. Let's say, because I don't have my regular holder, let's say I didn't have my laptop, so theoretically I go ahead and take a loaf of bread and it could hold up my phone. That would be permitted because it's not ruining the bread in any way, right? Whereas the olive oil, the olives are being ruined, and that's why hani mi'isi, the olives are being ruined. Now, halacha l'maisa, practically speaking, the way we rule is actually you're allowed to use a substance, a food, even though you're taking it out of being a food and causing it to be, let's say, soap or something like that. That is permitted as long as it's being used for a human purpose. I'm allowed to ruin the food. So, if I want to go ahead and take, strawberries and make some shampoo, whatever, I'm allowed to do so because I'm still using it for a benefit. I'm also allowed to use food for a mitzvah purpose, even if I'm not considered, one could argue it's wasting food. What I can't do is like the bar mitzvah cocktail. When I go ahead and I put the olive and the soda and the whatever it is, and I'm just making a concoction of grossness, that I can't do because that is wasting food. But to go ahead and use food for any purpose, as long as it's a human purpose, for a higher purpose, that is permitted. That's the way we rule. Not like Rav Sheshes, not like the way the Gemara is understanding Shmuel over here, but you are allowed to use olives to make soap, etc. Okay. So you have these three Amorim sitting together one Shabbos. They brought Barda to them. Ravashi washed their hands with Barda, which would seem to be the halacha. And Mar Zutra did not. Amrle, they said to Mar Zutra, don't you hold like that? The Rav Shesha said that Barda is permitted. Amrle Rav Mordechai, there's another Amor that was there sitting on the sidelines, and he says, don't ask Mar Zutra this question because he holds even during the week you can't use Barda. Why not? Savar la ki hadatani held like this following brayso. Megar adam gilde soa begilde maka shal basar b'shvil tzaro. A person allowed to scrape off crust of filth. Let's say a person has like some dirt caked on them, and they're allowed to scrape off a scab from a wound, only if it's because it's uncomfortable. If you're doing it because it's uncomfortable, it's allowed. And mishvili yapos, also if you're doing it because you want to make yourself look good, you don't like the scab, it has this big scratch on your head, and you take off the scab, it looks better, that's usr. Why is it usr? So this goes back to, there's a isser daraisa that a man should not dress like a woman should not dress like a man. Now, it's not limited to dressing like one or the other, but it's even wearing things that are perhaps associated with the other gender. There's a big discussion among the poskim about guns. Is a gun by definition a male item? And therefore, is it permitted for a woman to have a gun? Nowadays, certainly in Israel, where it's common for women to wear guns, to have guns, it's not a shaila. Nowadays, probably not in discussion in America either. I remember hearing a shaila once. Someone asked me this kind of shaila actually. They wanted to use they wanted to get a gun, and they were told by postic they can't get a gun because it's a male's utensils. They said, what if I get a pink gun? Then it's clearly a female, or whatever. Someone would argue it's clearly a female item, and therefore should it be permitted? Okay. Bottom line is. The Isser, so again, not only is it including clothing or even items like a gun, but even doing things to beautify yourself would be included in that prohibition. Okay, so Meimar Umar Zutra, right? And so basically said, therefore you can't use Barda because it's a type of beautification type of thing, cleanses you, it's deep clean, and that's like too feminine, and that would be included in that Isser. The Inu, Kaman Svirle, who did a Meimar Rashi, they clearly didn't hold this. They hold Ki Hadatani, like the following Brisa, Rochitz Adam Panav Yad Raglav, V'chol Yom Mishvil Kona, a person let to wash their face every day. Why? Mishum Shemar Kol Pal Hashem Amaneu, all Hashem made is for a sake. In other words, they understood that to look decent, to look like a normal mensch, to look like a regular good person, to not look like disheveled, that's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah because we are walking manifestations of Hashem. And therefore, it's important that we look presentable. And so there is this, without getting, there's a whole halachic discussion, but essentially you have two poles over here. On the one hand, speaking for males over here, you have a prohibition against doing things which are seen as feminine. That is part of the prohibition of not wearing women's clothing. And on the other pole, you have this idea of looking like a mensch, looking like a proper person. And finding the space in between them is really exactly where things fall is going to be is a question that comes up in a number of places. So for example, shaving or plucking eyebrow hair, right? So is that something which is permitted? Probably depends on the time period. Probably 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, maybe 3 decades ago. I think it was not so common for men to shave or to pluck their eyebrow hair. Right nowadays, it's fairly common, and therefore it no longer becomes. Now it's more of a matter of just looking like a mensch, which is permitted, and not looking disheveled, as opposed to doing a feminine item, right? So it will depend on the society, it would depend on the time. It would change depending on society. Okay, some discussion about who defines society. Let's say society was doing, but that's the basic gist of the discussion. Okay. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, we go back to the discussion of hatmana, of insulating. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Omer Kupa, Mata, Altzida, V'notel, Shema, Yito. So we have a discussion in our Mishnah about a box. Let's say you have a box. Here's my tissue box over here. And you have the pot, which is over here. Pretend all these tissues are not here. You have a pot of cholents, okay, that goes right over here. And the tissue and things on the side are shearings, which are muksa. They're used in insulation. I put my cholent pot over here. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, if I want my cholent on Shabbos, what I got to do is take this whole box, tilt it over, allow the cholents come out. So the Chacham say, no, I can take the cholent pot out and then put it back in when I am done. Okay? So now we have a qualification on this discussion. Amrav Abba, Amrav Chia bar Ashi, Hakol Modim Shniskalkala, Hagumash Lahachser. They all agree that if the cavity, I should really take out all these tissues to show you what this looks like. But basically, again, you have this cavity, right? You have the shearings and you have the cholent pot over here going on top of it. If the cavity is ruined, meaning if now the shearings fall inside of it, right? And now the cavity is gone, so it looks like this. So I can't really put it in without moving the shearings away, even if I use the cholent pot to maneuver it around. Then everyone agrees I'm not allowed to do so. I think when I ask the question, did you just read the Mishnah? Look at the Gemara's going to ask the following questions. No, we learned from the Mishnah. The Chachamim omrim no tul machzer. The Chacham say you could remove it and return it. So Hechidami, what case is our Mishnah talking about? If the Mishnah is talking about a case where the cavity did not become disarranged, if we're talking about a case where you took it out and there was the cavity did not get ruined, it's empty. It's all totally still the way it was with the children pot when the children pot was there. So nothing fell in, and now I'm going ahead and I put it back in. Of course you're allowed to put it back in. In other words, what is Rabbi Elazar thinking? How could Rabbi Elazar tell you it's usher? So Elalav, Afagav Niskalkala, Afapid Niskalkala Guma must be that our Mishnah, which said the Chum said you could take it out and put it back in, it must be a case where the Guma, where the cavity, was ruined. And nonetheless, the Chacham say it's allowed. So how could you, Rav Abba, in the name of Rav Chia bar Ashi, say that if it gets ruined, everyone agrees it's usher? The Mishnah clearly talking about a case where the cavity got ruined, and yet the Rabbanan say it's mutter. So the Gemara says lo. No, you're misreading the Mishnah. La'olam dilo niskakla. Really, the cavity in our Mishnah did not get ruined. In other words, the pieces did not fill in. We're talking about a question of a concern that if we permit the person to remove the pot, then the shearings will fall in, and then the person would come to move the muktzah, and that's what's going to be asur. One's concern, my husband is concerned that even if it looks like everything is okay, there's a concern some of the pieces are going to fall in. I might start moving muktzah around. That's a problem. And say we're not concerned, but everyone's going to agree, according to this view, that if it did fall in, you can't put the pot back in because you're going to move the muktzah, even though it's indirect. Even though it's indirect, they hold that moving the muktzah indirectly is going to be asur. Amar Rav Huna, says Rav Huna, Hai slikusta. This slikusta plant. What is slikusta? Slikuta was a popular plant amongst the wealthy in the ancient world in Babylon. And basically what it was a plant which had a very refreshing smell. And people would come in from outside and they would take this slikusta plant, smell it, and then they put it back into the earth. They'd have like a pile of dirt, like a flower pot, and they'd stick it back in this thing. So datza shalfa b'hadar datza shai. If you want to be able to use it on Shabbos, what you have to do is you have to put it in once, take it out. Put it in once, take it out. And doing so, what you've done is you've made a good hole, and now the dirt is not going to fall in every time you move it in and out, and therefore you won't move the dirt in a indirect fashion. Okay, if you love usher, but if you didn't do it a bunch of times, then it's forbidden because you're going to move the dirt in an indirect fashion. Amar Shmuel, Haisakina deveni urbe, a knife that's stored between rows of bricks. Keep in mind, back in the day, they did not have like drawers. They kept a lot of things in the walls of their houses. Lots of Gemara is talking about walls of the houses falling down and glass falling down and all that stuff. They would keep their knives. A knife is sharp. You don't want to keep it out. So you basically would stick it into between the bricks. Okay, now, if you want to do so, datza shalfa v'hadar datza shri. Yeah, we have to put it in, take it out. Put it in, take it out. And then you're allowed to use it on Shabbos. Why? Because then, if it already has that type of hole, then when you're going to pull it out again on Shabbos or put it back in, it's not going to move the muktzah. If you love usher, but if not, you're going to move muktzah, even though it's indirect. It's through the moving of the knife, it's still forbidden. A related halacha, begordisa dekani shaper dami. You're allowed to put a knife into a comb of reeds. A comb of reeds reeds are packed together tightly. There's a concern that I stick the knife and I'm going to inadvertently cut off the shell of one of the reeds, and that might be an issue of an isser of smoothing, but it's mutter. Okay, now we're going to ask a question on this slikusa plant and the knife halacha from the following brayso. Amar Mordechai leRava, Masiv Rav Ketina to Yufter. Ketina presented a challenge to this teaching from a Mishnah. A person who places turnip or radishes in the ground under a grapevine for storage. So back in the day, they did not have refrigerators, and so what do? How do you keep things fresh? Stick it in the ground. It's cold in there. Excuse me. Okay, so basically a person is able to, you have turnips, radishes, fully grown. You want to keep it fresh, so you're allowed to put it under a grapevine for storage. Grapevine has some good shade, grapevines are legal, grapevine has some shade. So, if some of the leaves are exposed, you don't have to be worried about the following halachos. Lo mishum kalaim. You don't have to worry about kalaim. Kalaim is basically the cooking. Cooking. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm a little distracted. Okay, it's basically kalaim is basically planting two types of items together. Some which is, by the way, people are not so need to think about it a little bit more. People have these home gardens. You have to be very careful not planting certain things together. That could be an isser of kilayim. So if you have these turnips which are not fully submerged, they haven't taken roots, and the leaves are still sticking out, there's no issue. The fact that it's next to the grapes, that's not kilayim. V'lo mishum shvius. It's not. Let's say you did this on shvius during Shemitah, it would not be in violation of planting on shvius. V'lo mishum meiser. If you pull it out during the year, it's not considered like new crops, which you'd be chayiv to give meiser on. Minitam Shabbos, and you're allowed to remove it on Shabbos. Remove it on Shabbos. Why are you allowed to remove it on Shabbos? You pull it out. Guess how much dirt's going to move? A lot, right? And we just said you can't move things in a indirect fashion. So Gemara says, Tiyufta, it is indeed a refutation of this view. And halacha l'maisa, we paskin that you are allowed to move things indirectly. If you have muktzah items, you're allowed to move them in an indirect fashion. You can't move muktzah directly, but you can move it indirectly. So for example, a common example is a freezer. A freezer is oftentimes filled, people don't know this, it's filled with muktzah items. Why? What's muktzah? It's food? No. If it's food that cannot be eaten on Shabbos, you have a raw piece of frozen meat, cannot be eaten on Shabbos. So, but you have your ices, and your ices, freeze pops for your kids are under the meat, or for yourself, and they're under the meat. So you pull out the freeze pops, and so according to Rav Huna and Shmuel, they would actually hold it's forbidden, because even though I'm not directly touching the meat, it's happening indirectly. Still, I'm moving it. I can't move muktzah. But we just proved, and this is the way we paskin, that no, you are allowed as long as I'm pulling out the non-muktzah item, pulling out a freeze pop, pulling out whatever I need from the freezer, which is non-muktzah. Even though it causes the muktzah item to move, it is mutter because it's moving muktzah in an indirect fashion. Have a great week. I'll see you tomorrow.